my dad and I have been spending a lot of time just talking while I've been here, talking about church, about the Bible, all the things that he's learning. Um, and when he asked me to speak, he was just kind of like, I like the things that you said last week during Sabbath school. And if you can just kind of maybe take some of that and, talk about the mission and the vision and the purpose of the church in your own words, because they hear it all the time from me. But maybe it would be helpful just to kind of hear, a little bit of something from someone who's not him. And so I got to thinking just about the why and my why, because this has been a journey that's going on 14 years for me, just in terms of developing my own relationship with Christ and understanding scripture for myself. Um, and so I started thinking about how to, I guess, put in practical terms the journey and how I feel about it, where I'm at now. And being the sports lover that I am, I started thinking about it in terms of sports. So I don't know how many of you have heard of or seen the movie For the Love of the Game, starring Kevin Costner. But for those who don't know, quick little synopsis. 40-year-old pitcher Billy Chappell, who's played by Kevin Costner, is practically a dinosaur by professional baseball standards. And in the movie, he's playing for the Detroit Lions. But he's fast approaching the end of his career. But as Chappell stands on the mound pitching the game of his life, his thoughts don't turn to his prized history in sports, but rather return again and again to his tumultuous relationship with Jane Aubrey, a single mom who has stood at his side through the good and the bad, but is now on the verge of leaving him. And during the movie, he's playing this game, but there's all these flashbacks happening during the course of the game, just about his life and his relationship with this woman and everything that he's been through in his career. And something that he said in the movie is, I used to believe, I still do, that if you give something your all, it doesn't matter if you win or lose. As long as you've risked everything, put everything out there. And I've done that. So what I want to talk to you about today is playing for the love of the game. So, you'll pray with me. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for just the opportunity to come together and spend time with each other and with you. Please open the hearts and the minds of your people, and please give us the word that you have for us today. Speak through me, use me. Thank you for everything you've done and everything you're going to do. We love you. Amen. So when this journey first began, I was at Oakwood University as a student, and I spoke here during the summer between my sophomore and junior years of college. And I was posting a lot on social media. And so when I got back to school for my junior year, someone was like, hey, you should speak for Power Hour, which was one of the on-campus worships that we had. And as I was thinking about my sermon, I thought of this question, and it asked, without the promise of heaven and without the threat of hell, would you still serve God? Mm. Without the promise of reward and without the threat of punishment, would you still serve God? And the purpose of asking that question was to determine whether, without, again, punishment or reward, the journey of finding transformation and purpose in God was still worth taking. Because I think, we hear a lot about salvation, like my dad was speaking about a couple of weeks ago. It's the blood, the blood, the blood, the blood. And heaven is the goal. Heaven is the reward. Store up treasures in heaven. And it's all about what happens after this life. It's all about doing good, being good in this life so that you can get your reward in the next life. And that's the whole purpose. And for me, especially growing up a Seventh-day Adventist and this whole Jesus is coming back tomorrow thing being pounded in my head since I was like in the womb. Mm-hmm. It's like, what, if any, is the value of being a Christian or a believer in Jesus without all the extra stuff? Like if you take all of that away, would I still be here? Would I want to still do this? Would I be proverbially playing for the love of the game? And as I've journeyed, it's been very easy to be outcome focused and outcome motivated. And I'm very much so the type of person who hates wasting my time. I do not, under any circumstances, like doing things just for the sake of doing it. It's like if I'm pouring my effort and my energy and my time into something, it needs to be worth it. There's something that I'm getting on the other end of this for this to make sense. And I hate feeling like I've wasted my time. I hate feeling like I've poured myself into something and got nothing out of it. And the, I guess, downside of that is you can start working on something or putting your effort into something, and if you don't see immediate results or the type of results that you want, you start falling off. Like you go to the gym and you start working out, and the muscles ain't popping, the weight isn't coming off, it's not giving what it's supposed to give, and it's just like, okay, do I want to get up at 5 a.m. before I go to work and keep doing this every day? Do I want to stop eating the cake and the ice cream and all the things that I enjoy and eat a salad, 3 times a day? Do I want to do any of those things if I'm not getting the results that I want? And that's why, for so many of us, it's hard to stay consistent and disciplined because you're looking for this instant gratification and you want something to look a certain way. And if it's not happening, it's like, what's the point of doing it, right? And so I think it's easy in our spiritual journey as well to glamorize and get caught up in the outcome and what you think is supposed to happen or what you think something is supposed to look like, and to forget everything that goes into the journey of getting there. We often, because we've been conditioned to be so reward minded, outcome motivated. No one's really even thinking about just the value of the journey, and how long the journey takes. And so, again, thinking about how do I illustrate this? Because, like I said, for me, I've been on this particular aspect of my journey for the last 14 years. And there are days when it feels like it's been 14 years, and then there are days where it feels like it was 2 seconds ago. I was 19 yesterday, or maybe I'm 19 today, to be honest, still trying to figure it out, still trying to understand. And you lose track of, just everything that has gone into what has gotten you here. And so I was thinking about just different Bible stories, right? Like Uncle Scott was talking about Joseph last week. And if you know the story of Joseph, you know that Joseph was 17, according to Genesis, when he had the visions and was sold into slavery by his brothers. And so then between Potiphar and being in prison, he was in there for 13 years. That's a really, really long time. And if you look at, but using Joseph as an example, if you read about what he did at Potiphar's house, if you read about what he did in the prison, he was still leading. He was still, being a blessing to people, using his insight into dreams and visions to help others, trying to get out, wanting to get out, but doing his best, even though he's in the darkest, most probably depressing and miserable moments of his life, still being consistent, still being disciplined. And even though it did not look like the vision that God had given him, he still gave his best. And it says multiple times throughout his story that God honored him. God blessed him. God blessed his efforts. And when Joseph finally does get to being called in front of Pharaoh to now interpret his dreams and to give him a plan for what to do when these famines are coming, it's like Joseph has been working the last 13 years. It may have been in Potiphar's house as a slave. It may have been in the prison as a prisoner. But he's been working. He's been leading. He's been organizing. He's been developing all of the skills that he needs now to execute the plan that he's given to Pharaoh. And because it's clear that he has not just integrity, not just capability, but this connection with God, Pharaoh's like, Joseph is like, find a man to do this. And Joseph is like, Pharaoh's like, what man is better than you to do this? And so now Joseph goes from being a slave and a prisoner to the second most powerful man in Egypt. He saves, as Uncle Scott pointed out, the entire world through the effort that was put in. But if Joseph hadn't been consistent, if Joseph hadn't been disciplined during that time, he wouldn't have been able to do ultimately what God had purposed him to do and what God told him he was called to do from the very beginning. His brothers hated him because of the visions that he was having. And he's seeing himself being lifted up above everyone in his family. And everybody's like, you're crazy. They're like, no, that's not going to happen. And then everything in his life is telling him, yeah, bro, like, hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's not looking good for you. And then lo and behold, through the journey, God brought him to the position that he had always been told he was going to fill. And we see the same thing with Moses, 40 years in Egypt and 40 years in the wilderness, or 40 years ruling in Midian. Now we now know that. And then before going back to free the Israelites, and then another 40 years in the wilderness. That's a really long time. We look at Jacob and his journey. You know, Esau was 40, I believe Genesis says, when his birthright was taken, and they're twins, so that means Jacob was 42. But by the time he gets to Egypt, he's 130. And during all of that, he's journeyed to get to his uncle Laban. He's worked 14 years overall for his wives. He's had these children. He was with his uncle Laban for 20 years, and that before he could journey back to the land of his fathers. And then he gets there, and then this famine happens, and he's lost his son Joseph, and then he goes to Egypt and ultimately dies in Egypt. But it's 130 years of life. So much happened during the time period. And so I think it's just really easy to lose sight of that. And as I was researching, I thought of David, because David also had that situation where he's anointed at age, or as a teenager, by Samuel to be the king of Israel. But I actually went back and read it. And reading the Bible at this point frustrates me, because I always find things that weren't told to me in the stories, in the movies, stuff that it completely changes my perspective of what's being communicated, because no one's emphasizing this, but it turns out it's important to me. And so if you'll turn with me to 1 Samuel 27. 1 Samuel 27. And so for context, there's this, all the Bible movies, or some of us may not know about them, but there's a lot of Bible movies out there. And growing up Seventh-day Adventist, you can't do anything from sundown Friday to sunset Saturday but watch Bible movies and do Bible and Jesus-related things. And so I had this obsession as a kid with all these different Bible movies. And I think it's Turner Classic Movies or TNT. I don't remember exactly who, but there was a company that made a whole bunch of live action Bible reenactments and did the best that they could to keep it, as authentic as possible. And those are still some of my favorite Bible movies. And I really loved the movie about David, because it was much more detailed. It was like a two VHS set of videos, and so it was long. It took up a lot of time on the Sabbath. It was interesting. There was a lot of blood and guts and fighting, and so loved that one. And I could probably tell you the whole plot of I've seen it so many times, the whole plot of the movie from beginning to end, and tell you a lot about what happened with David's life. But from the movie, and just I think the general understanding of David's story, that he was anointed by Samuel. That he went and fought Goliath. That he worked for King Saul as his armor bearer. He played the harp for him to help dispel his demons and stuff. But ultimately, King Saul just couldn't take it and was like, David has to die. And so Jonathan's like, no, my dad's not really trying to. He wouldn't do that without telling me. And David's like, well, test it. And so Jonathan tested, and it's like, oh yeah, no, you about to get got, so you gotta go. And so David runs into the wilderness, goes to all these different cities. We know about Nabal, and him ultimately marrying Nabal's wife Abigail during the course of all this. We know about the time where he sneaks up on King Saul and cuts off a piece of his cloak, and then it's like, I could have killed you, would have killed you, but I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not gonna harm the head on God's anointed. Can you leave me alone? Because I'm not out to get you. And Saul's like, cool, and then tries to kill him again. But then it kind of leaves it there. In the movie, in the story, you just kind of understand that David's out in the wilderness somewhere. Saul is still ruling. Then Saul gets into this battle with the Philistines, goes to the witch of Endor, summons Samuel's spirit, or what he thinks is Samuel's spirit. The spirit tells him he's going to die. He dies, and then David becomes king of Israel. That's not actually what happened, though. And I didn't know that until I actually went back and read the story. So starting in 1 Samuel 27, verses 1 through 7, and verse 12, it says, David said in his heart, I shall certainly perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than to escape to the land of the Philistines. Then Saul will despair of seeking me any longer within the borders of Israel, and I shall escape out of his hand. So David set out and went over, he and the 600 men who were with him, to King Ashish, son of Maoch of Gath. David stayed with Ashish at Gath, he and his troops, every man with his household, and David with his 2 wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel, and Abigail of Carmel, Nabal's widow. When Saul was told that David had fled to Gath, he no longer sought for him. Then David said to Ashish, If I have found favor in your sight, let a place be given me in one of the country towns so that I may live there. For why should your servant live in the royal city with you? So that day Ashish gave him Ziklag. Therefore Ziklag has belonged to the kings of Judah to this day. The length of time that David lived in the country of the Philistines was for 1 year and 4 months. Then if you go down to verse 12, it says, Ashish trusted David, thinking, he has made himself utterly abhorrent to his people Israel. Therefore he shall always be my servant. And so unbeknownst to me, David isn't just in the wilderness somewhere running away from Saul until Saul dies. David eventually is like, I'm tired of running away from this man. I'm going to go to the land of the Philistines because Saul's not going to look for me there. And so he goes, gets in good with the king, and the king is like, cool, here, have this land, and you can stay forever. And I want us to be really focused on this aspect of David's story, because I think with a Joseph, for example, right? Joseph kind of never really lost sight of what was supposed to be happening. God has given me this vision. It's not looking good, but okay, this could maybe work. I'm gonna still just do my best, be consistent, whatever else. And, eventually maybe something will work out, and it did. With Moses, maybe wasn't really thinking about being the deliverer or whatever, but once that came to his mind, okay, I'm going. Jacob, I have a birthright. And so I may be here in the land of my uncle Laban, but I got a birthright. Eventually, I'm going back to the land of my fathers. I'm taking my family back to the land of my fathers. Even though I've been here 20 years, it's time to go back. David is like, well, this isn't working. Saul is trying to kill me. I got to go. And where he's at, the king is like, cool. His people ain't messing with him no more. So I got it. And so if we keep reading, if you go to 1 Samuel 28, verses 1 and 2, it says, In those days the Philistines gathered their forces for war to fight against Israel. Ashish said to David, You know, of course, that you and your men are to go out with me in the army. David said to Ashish, Very well, then you shall know what your servant can do. Ashish said to David, Very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life. So at this point, and then if you keep looking, it says Saul consults immediately. And so the context of this particular conversation with David and Ashish is that Saul is preparing to go up against the Philistines as well in the battle that ultimately kills him. And Ashish is having this conversation with David, like, we about to go fight. We pull it up. And David's like, yeah, and you about to see what I can do against my own people. David has completely lost the plot at this point. Ashish is like, you're my bodyguard for life. And David's like, cool, we pulling up. I'm not messing with them no more. I'm on this side. Y'all my people now. You're my king. Let's go. And so let's go to 1 Samuel 29. Because in the rest of 28, Saul is consulting with the witch of Endor. He's summoning the quote-unquote spirit of Samuel, trying to get some assurance in this battle. And so 1 Samuel 29, meanwhile the Philistines are getting ready to go fight as well. It says, Now the Philistines gathered all their forces at Aphek, while the Israelites were encamped by the spring that is in Jezreel. As the lords of the Philistines were passing on by hundreds and by thousands, and David and his men were passing on in the rear with Ashish, the commanders of the Philistines said, What are these Hebrews doing? She said to the commanders of the Philistines, "Is this not David, the servant of King Saul of Israel, who has been with me now for days and years? Since he deserted to me, I have found no fault in him to this day." But the commanders of the Philistines were angry with him. And the commanders of the Philistines said to him, "Send the man back, so that he may return to the place that you have assigned to him. He shall not go down with us to battle, or else he may become an adversary to us in the battle. For how could this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord? Would it not be with the heads of the men here? Is this not David, of whom they sing to one another in dances? Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s." Then Ashish called David and said to him, "As the Lord lives, you have been honest, and to me it seems right that you should march out and in with me in the campaign. For I have found nothing wrong in you from the day of your coming to me until today. Nevertheless, the lords do not approve of you. So go back now and go peaceably. Do nothing to displease the lords of the Philistines." David said to Ashish, "But what have I done? What have you found in your servant from the day I entered your service until now, that I should not go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" Ashish replied to David, "I know that you are as blameless in my sight as an angel of God. Nevertheless, the commanders of the Philistines have said, 'He shall not go up with us to the battle.' Now then, rise early in the morning, you and the servants of your lord who came with you, and go to the place that I appointed for you. As for the evil report, do not take it to heart, for you have done well before me. Start early in the morning and leave as soon as you have light." So David set out with his men early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines, but the Philistines went up to Judah. And so what I thought was interesting about that particular portion of the story was, one, like I said, David is full blown anti-Israel, like not messing with those guys anymore. I'm down. We were like, I'm ready to roll. We fight. And I think on my own life and how God has opened and closed doors for me in my journey. It's like you have this idea of what religion is supposed to look like and how things are supposed to play out. And you think you're walking, you think you're doing what you're supposed to do. And you kind of accepted that, like, okay, this doesn't look like this is not what I had in mind. This is not what I thought this was going to look like based on what's been told to me about who I'm supposed to be and what my purpose is and what I'm supposed to be doing. But it's okay. It's fine. I'm cool. I'm doing the best that I can with what I got, and it's okay. And out of nowhere, God is like, no, this isn't aligned. And it's kind of like, well, like, what did I do now? Right? Like, I've already come up against so much adversity going down this path. This didn't work for me. And I'm trying to do what I thought made sense in light of the fact that this is like a closed door. This is not happening. And so I'm here and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And you're still saying no. Like, what is wrong? What did I do? What am I not doing? Like, why can't we get it together? But because the door is closed, and sometimes God forces you to close the door, but sometimes you don't see that the door needs to be closed, and God is just like, no. And so I do believe, because this is not a lie, David is not supposed to live with the Philistines as the king's bodyguard for the rest of his life. Like that's not his anointing. That's not his purpose. And he was told that's not what's supposed to happen. But he lost the plot. And I do believe, it doesn't say that God is God inspired, but I do believe that God put it in the hearts and the minds of the Philistine leaders, because Ashish was down, he's lost the plot too. But the Philistine leaders were like, no, you're not one of us, because you're not one of us. You don't fit. You don't belong. Regardless of what you've said, whatever you've done, those are still your people. And so I'm going to read something in a second, but if you know the story of David, you know that the battle doesn't go well, right? And Saul and Jonathan and his other sons that are in that battle die. And Jonathan was David's absolute best friend. His brother loved him with his whole heart. And I can't imagine that if David had gone to battle and had seen Jonathan, had seen Saul, had seen his friends, his family on the battlefield, that he would have just been like, whatever, right? Like, you can't fight. And I found that for myself, like, as much as you try to fight destiny, as much as you try to fight purpose and who you are, like, all it takes is the right situation for it to be like, yeah, no. And there are times when people who you aren't even expecting to see you for real, see you and say, this isn't you, you don't belong. And God is like, yeah, you don't. And so this door is closed too, because now I know it didn't look like this is the direction, but we're circling back. You had some things to learn, some stuff to do, we're circling back. So let's go to 2 Samuel chapter 2. Verses 1 and 2. And so as I said, ultimately the Philistines win the battle. Saul and his sons die. And David mourns. He's sad. He's not rejoicing because this is all. He's lost his best friend. But as, after the period of mourning has ended, it's like, okay, well, what now? Right? Like, I'm here in the land of the Philistines, but like, Saul's dead now. And so that's a game changer. What now? And so in verse 1, it says, after this, David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? The Lord said to him, go up. David said, to which shall I go up? He said, to Hebron. So David went up there along with his 2 wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel, and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And so David comes up to Judah. And you would think, cool, okay, we're on and popping now. Thought we weren't going in this direction? All right, Saul's dead. Let's go. And in the movie, that's what happens. Saul dies, and then David is just the king. And then you're just digging into all the things that happened. That's not what happened. So go with me to verses 8 through 11. But Abner, son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, had taken Ishbaal, son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. He made him king over Gilead, the Asherites, Jezreel, Ephraim, Benjamin, and all of Israel. Ishbaal, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. But the house of Judah followed David. The time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. And so I was like, well, wait a minute. Because that wasn't part of the story. Like, y'all made it seem like Saul died and then David is just the king. And I would imagine, because if it was me, I would have been like, okay, course correction. I was wrong. Not supposed to spend the rest of my life with the Philistines. Cool, I am supposed to be king. But wait a minute. Like, you said go up to Hebron. You said go up to Judah. I'm supposed to be the king of all of Israel. And I just have Judah. And not only do I just have Judah, but I just have Judah for 7 years and 6 months. So for almost another 8 years, I'm king, kind of, but it's still not looking like what it's supposed to look like. It's still not the vision that you gave me. It's still not what you said was supposed to happen. But notwithstanding, David said, okay, this is where I'm at. This is what we're doing. And so David is the king of Judah. And as it said, he did it for 7 years and 6 months. So turn with me to 2 Samuel chapter 3. Verse 1. And so during this time, because again, we lose sight of the journey, right? It's like, why is it taking 7 years? Why can't I just be the king of everything? Why is it taking 7 years? But in chapter 3, verse 1, it says, there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. David grew stronger and stronger, while the house of Saul became weaker and weaker. And so it's not just David is just the king in Judah, and they're fighting, but David is growing. David is learning. David and his house are becoming stronger and stronger, while Saul's house, the opposition, is becoming weaker and weaker. And so it's not just David is, just languishing in obscurity for 7 years. It's God is working. God is moving. God is putting the pieces together so that David can walk into his anointing. David can walk into his birthright. But unbeknownst to David, right, that takes time. And so there was time that had to happen. There was time that needed to be taken while God dealt with Saul and got Saul out of There was time that was required for God to be able to deal with the house of Saul and to weaken them and to strengthen David's house so that ultimately he could become the king. So turn with me to 2 Samuel chapter 5. Verses 1 through 4, and it says, Then all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, Look, we are your bone and flesh. For some time while Saul was king over us, it was you who led out Israel and brought it in. The Lord said to you, It is you who shall be shepherd of my people Israel, you who shall be ruler over Israel. So all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. At Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and at Israel, he reigned over all Israel and Judah 33 years. And so if you look at the time, David was anointed as a teenager. Scholars say that David was anointed as a teenager. He fought Goliath as a teenager. It was anywhere from maybe 10 to 14 years. Yes, 10 to 14 years before David became king of Judah. And then another 7.5 years before David became the king of Israel. So if you think about it, it's really kind of like a 20-year stretch almost between him being told you're going to be the king and the actual realization of that. And during all of this, the king is trying to kill you. You're on the run. You lose the wife you had, pick up 2 more. You go to the land of the Philistines. You're thinking that that's what's supposed to happen and what's supposed to be. Your best friend ends up dying. His father dies. Then you go back to claim your birthright, claim your anointing, walk in your purpose. And they're like, yeah, nah, you can, these people are down with you, but these people aren't. And so it takes another 7 years and 6 months for that to all be resolved, for everything to come together and actually be what God told David it was going to be. And even then, right? Like once you're king, there's a whole other second half of the story, right? So much that happened while David was king that wasn't what you would think. And I think in telling these stories and thinking about these stories, they do us a disservice because that matters, right? Like as someone who has been told from the beginning of my life, Jesus is coming tomorrow, I always thought I don't have time. I don't have time for anything. I don't have time to invest I don't have time to grow. I don't have time to learn. I need to get it together right now, today, because if I don't, I'm going to be lost. If I don't get it together, like I need to live in my purpose. I need to be perfect. I need to, putting all this pressure on myself because I'm like, I don't have time. I don't have time to figure it out. And if you look at God's methodology, right? Because that's what if you look at God's methodology, if you look at what actually happened in these stories and really look at just the time frame, you look at how long it takes God may say 20 years before it happens, this is what's going to happen. This is who you're supposed to be. And it takes forever. I'm sure it felt like this is taking forever. You're a teenager when God tells you you're going to be king. And then not just does it take 20 years, but then you have to go through everything that you have to go through in the process to get there. And nobody tells you that. Samuel didn't say, Saul is going to try to kill you. You're going to go live with you killed Goliath, but then you're going to go live with the Philistines for a year and 4 months and be ready to fight Israel. You're like fully going to be like, forget these guys and be over here. And then even once Saul dies and you come back, it's still going to take 7 years, right? A long time before you're fully the king of Israel. David didn't get any of that. He got, I've anointed you to be king of Israel. And it's like, okay, cool. Right. And so for me, particularly this trip, this is the first time I've heard my dad say in my life, and I'm 33, which isn't that old, but in 33 years, I've never heard my dad say, you have time. And this trip, he told me, you have time. And it's been a complete game changer because I realized part of my motivation part of the reason why I'm so outcome motivated is because I don't have time. I need results now. I need to see the fulfillment of purpose and manifestation of that now. Because Jesus is coming back tomorrow. There's no point in doing anything, investing in anything, trying to have any kind of life because Jesus is coming back tomorrow. And I don't want you to feel bad because that pressure was put on you. That pressure was put on you. That pressure was put on everybody in this room who comes from an Adventist background. Like, this is not, everybody experience that. Everybody's trying to navigate time and trying to figure out not just trying to figure out when this is all going to happen and when it's all going to take place so I can have some kind of bearing on what I have time to do, what I have time to invest in, what I have time to accomplish, what relationships I have time to think about, what church I have time to be a part of, what friends I have time to have, what skills I have time to learn, what careers I have time to pursue. And you're building your whole life around this sense of urgency. And so to be able to look at the methodology of God and be able to say with confidence, now I have time, has lifted so much of a weight off of me. It's been so freeing. And I want you to experience the same thing. I want you to know that you have time. And you need to know that you have time because there's work to do. There's work to do. I had a vision for this church, almost 10 years ago, 9 years ago. I had a vision for this church and what it was going to look like. I had a vision of my family being together in church, in ministry. And it was at a time when my family was really fractured. And everybody was just kind of like, sure, okay. But then I look today, and it's not just my brother and his mom. It's not just my dad and my mom together. It's my church family, my Maranatha family. It's new friends like Roselle. It's my Uncle Ed, who wasn't going to Maranatha with him, and my Uncle Ed is here. And it's just like, you don't know, but like seeing it, right? Like believing that that's possible. And then how we got here. Two totally, completely very different things. If I think about where my dad was when this journey started in 2010 in a car ride coming back from Oakwood, and just how long it took him to not be Adventist anymore. It was 9 years. My dad didn't officially stop considering himself an Adventist until 2019, and that was after being an Adventist for 35 years. It took 9 years just to unlearn enough, because he'd been indoctrinated for the past 35 years. Or the past 20 something years. It took that long just to be able to say, I'm not this anymore. It's been another 5 years almost since then. And it's taken him that long to get to where he is now. And if you talk to him, he's like, I might be somewhere else 6 months from now. Who knows? It's still a constantly evolving evolution. And what people don't see is the work. And that's why I titled this message For the Love of the Game, because all of that gets lost. The love of the game gets lost when the only thing you can think about is, I need to win tomorrow. What has to happen? I mean, how can I do 1 million jumping jacks and shoot 1 million jump shots before the game tomorrow? Because that's what I have to do to win. And it's just like, no, that's not how it works. It's consistent daily conditioning, consistent daily skill drilling. That's the only way to get better at a game like basketball, right? And because it's like time is going by so fast, it's like you're not even thinking about what's happening, right? But my understanding of leadership, my understanding of dedication, commitment is because of my dad. I saw him, even as an Adventist, showing up, doing a thankless job. People who don't understand, it's like you may see people being like, oh, he's the Godfather. Or, you see how people respect him, how people defer to him. And you have no appreciation for his leadership ability. He's been working on since he was a kid. He's 67. And his leadership started coming out when he was a kid on the playground. rounding the kids up for games of baseball. His leadership ability was honed during, 35 years of being a Seventh-day Adventist, being a head elder. His biblical knowledge was honed first as the personal ministry, first for Bible studies from his friend, receiving Bible studies, then becoming the personal ministries leader and giving Bible studies at Conant, then becoming an elder, then becoming the head elder at Belleville, at Maranatha, becoming a lay minister. All this time, he didn't go to Oakwood. He didn't go get a Master's of Divinity from Andrews, but he's been working quietly behind the scenes. To this day, when I come visit, I'll get up to go to the bathroom and get a drink of water in the middle of the night, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. It's dark, and my dad is in his chair reading or thinking, just quiet, silent, and that's what no one sees. And the reason why I didn't want to be a leader, the reason why I've shied away from that for so long, is because that's a lot. It's so much. And I can't even imagine being that consistent and that dedicated with anything for that long. Right. And it's second nature now. It's something he doesn't even think about. And I think all of it just gets taken for granted. And I know it's for the love of the game, not because he's up here preaching now, not because he's pastoring now. I know it's for the love of the game because when him and my mom were separated, my dad had been censored, wasn't going to church, wasn't an elder, had nothing, all of stripped of everything that had previously been his identity. Still studying because he could. A random friend at work was like, come give me and my wife Bible studies. And he did. And again, no church, no big pulpit, no congregation, fallen from grace, what have you. But still, it's routine. It's a part of who I am. I'm here. It's not about the accolades. It's not about the attention. It's about the love of the game, pure and simple. And I'll do it if I'm in my living room by myself at 4 o'clock in the morning. I'll do it if I'm taken down as an elder and only these couple of people over here want to listen to what I have to say. I'll drive out to their house and sit down and talk about the Bible with them because I love it. And what I want us as a community to be intentional about moving forward is one, knowing you have time. And so that should free you. You have time. But also you got to do the work. Amen. And you have someone here in the space who is an example of doing the work. And it is hard and it is not glamorous. It's thankless. It's humbling. It's discouraging. It's lonely at times. But if you love the game, you will do it. Amen. And on the other side, warning, right? Because if it's not for the love of the game, if that's not why you're here, and this doesn't look like what you think it's supposed to ultimately look like, it doesn't do for you what you think it's supposed to do for you, at some point, this is going to stop working for you. Because at that point, it's not about community. It's not about finding value just in being here, finding value in learning, finding value in building relationship with God, studying and growing and understanding because you can. Because it's important. Because it should be important to you. At that point, it's not about any of that. There is no value without reward. There is no value without fear of punishment. And if that's what you need to keep you going, to keep you motivated, you need somebody to be incentivizing you with all the wonderful things you're going to get, or with a spot up here in the pulpit preaching and teaching or whatever else. You need attention, you need validation, or if you need fear, right? Maybe you don't need attention and validation, but you need fear to be the thing that's fueling your desire to be here, to show up, to study, because you're scared of what's going to happen to you if you don't. And it's a problem for you to be in an environment where fear is not the focus, fear is not the motivator. And this isn't going to work for you. And my dad has said it, but it needs to be reiterated that this is not for everybody. Everything isn't for everybody, and that's okay. But what we're doing here, the purpose, is for the love of the game. And you can't love the outcome more than you love the work.
Right.
You can't love the destination more than you love the journey. And for myself, the thing, because I've been like, purpose, like, what do you even want out of life, right? Like if I could boil it down to something, what is the thing that I want to do? And I realized that all I really want is my best. I want to do my best and give my best in everything that I do, because then I can be like a Joseph, right? I can't, if I know that I've busted my butt for Potiphar, I said no to your trifling wife. I've done everything I could possibly do, and you put me in prison. Well, that's God's will, right? There's no question about whether or not it's God's will, because there's nothing I left on the table. There's nothing I could have done. If I'm in prison for the rest of my life, right? And I just, whatever, I'm just here leading out in the prison, being a model prisoner. I never get out of here. I interpreted the vision for the baker and for the cupbearer, and they just forgot about it. Or, the cupbearer, the baker's dead. The cupbearer just forgets about me and never mentions me to the Pharaoh, and I never get out. Well, that's God, because I've done everything I could possibly do. I've left nothing on the table. But what I believe, right, is that if you have purpose, if you know who you are, if you know what God has called you to do, and you do the work will pay off. And the journey may not always look like what you think it's supposed to look like, but as with Joseph, the journey took you down some twists and some turns, but ultimately it was everything working together for your good, even the bad, to get you to where God has called you to be. And so we have to, in my opinion, be intentional about doing the best, because that's how you determine God's will for your life. If you're going hard every single day, you're working to heal, to grow, evolve, unlearn, get rid of your indoctrination, to heal your wounds, to be a kinder, more loving, compassionate person, to really embrace the unconditional love of God, so that you have more kindness for yourself because you know you're loved, so that you can then be a more kind, compassionate, and loving person to the people around you. Because that's what I believe it means when it says treat others the way that you want to be treated. Love others the way that you love yourself. If you don't love yourself through understanding and experiencing the unconditional love of God, you don't have any love really to give to anybody else. If you cannot give a love that you haven't experienced. And godly love is not something that we have innately in us. Godly love that we give to each other is an extension of the love that we are supposed to be accepting from God. And that's why the affirmation of faith is what it is. And so we have to, if we are not doing the work of embracing all of those things and letting God into our lives and our hearts, then you never know for sure whether or not the outcome could have been different. You can't say for sure whether or not it was God's will that closed the door. It was God's will that opened the door, because you didn't leave everything on the table. You didn't put everything out there. You were so worried about winning and losing, or whatever you were worried about, that you didn't give it all and then let God do what God was going to do. But if you give it all, whatever the outcome is, good, bad, God opens the door, God closed the door, whatever else, there's nothing been left on the table. There's nothing you could have done. And you can leave the outcome to the person who's ordered your steps, determined your purpose, and trust that the good work that God began in you will be seen to its completion. However it may look right now. I know I've done everything I could possibly do, and the rest is God's. The rest is in God's hands, and I'm going to let God be God, because I can't control any of that. And that's how you find real peace. That's how you find real joy. That's how you find real healing. It's in the work. It's in the journey. It's not in the destination. It's not in the outcome. Because if you don't do the work, if you don't take the journey, you never get there in the first place. Whatever you think you've been called to do or be, if you don't do the day-to-day stuff right now, you're never going to be equipped. He's equipped to be the pastor because of all the work, all the hours spent leading in different avenues, spent studying, trying to learn, trying to understand, trying to better himself as a person so that he can be more kind, more compassionate, more loving. But he's not always been like this. He's not always been accepting of people and what they had going on. Part of the schism in our family was because he struggled to accept my brother. Because my brother wasn't Adventist. My brother didn't live his life and it didn't look how it was supposed to look. And he's had to learn, he's had to grow. But that's work. Mm-hmm. And so I will close and have a song, but I just want us to remember that one, we have time, and two, the only way we get to fully walking in purpose, fully walking in anointing, fully walking in who God has called us to be, is by doing the little, consistent, disciplined things that you have to do every single day. And we are blessed to have someone who has really, really done a lot of work to help us on that journey. And as we lean into that ourselves, we are better able to help others. And I do believe people are going to come. I do believe that people are going to come. But people are not, God is not going to bring broken people here if all we're going to do is more damage. God is not going to let someone who's hurt come here looking for love, looking for understanding, growth, purpose, what have you, if it's going to just make the situation worse. And so what we have to do is our job so that when the time comes, we can help be leaders and examples of what not just love and community and kindness and compassion looks like, but what it looks like when you do the work, where you can get if you commit and trust the journey, commit to and trust the journey.
Amen.